So I'm very excited. I have got Sarah Erikson here from probably the hottest publisher around at the moment, and this is Renegade Game Studios. Thank you very much for giving over your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
So just to begin, give us a brief sort of précis of the company, how it came about, how you came to be working there, because I believe you've got history in the gaming industry, right? You used to work at Yellow before Renegade, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so Renegade Game Studios was started by President Scott Gaeta, and he's been in the industry for a very long time. He worked at Decipher, he owned his own game store, he worked at Upper Deck, and then he was one of the co-founders of Cryptozoic Entertainment. And that's actually where I met him. I owned my own game store in Bozeman, Montana, and when I was doing that, I like to volunteer for companies like Wizards of the Coast and help them out with big events. And I was doing that for the World of Warcraft trading card game. And when Cryptozoic took over that, I met Scott Gaeta there, and then he offered me a full-time position in the company. So that was very exciting. It was fun to see a different tier of the industry. And I started working for him about 5 years ago now. And so when he actually broke off and started Renegade, it was just him and his wife. So I actually left Cryptozoic and worked for Yellow for a couple of years before he hired me back, which was very exciting.
Excellent. So what's your history as a gamer?
I have played games since I was a little kid. My family always played board games in the evenings, and it was just something we spent time doing together. And I also played a lot of video games as a kid, too. I was lucky enough to have a family that actually had a computer back in the 80s, which was kind of a big deal. And so I played a lot of video games on my Commodore 64, which was pretty awesome back then. And
Monkey Island, was that Commodore 64?
Oh, it may have been. I have very limited access to only a certain number of games. So I had Jumpman Jr. That was one of my favorites. And then after that, I started playing a lot of like text-based RPGs and that type of thing. But like Ultima Online, I played that one. That was pretty exciting with the little mouse and you adventured around. It was very cheesy.
It's amazing. It's amazing what you'll stomach as a kid. I remember I think it was a Commodore 64, playing this motocross game, and it was atrocious. And yet I think I must have wasted most of my formative years playing it.
That sounds about right. Yeah, but that was a very exciting time in, I think, the gaming industry in general, because you actually had people being able to experience these games in their own houses. Because before that, there were arcade games, which were exciting in and of themselves, but then being able to sit in your own house and do this thing on your own. I think as kids, it allowed us a lot of freedom to think about games in our own time and really personalize them. And then a lot of people ended up programming them and getting into the industry that way. So Commodore 64s, I think, were actually a pretty important part of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And it's amazing, sort of, again, what you'd put up with. So a lot of these games were sort of single-player games, and yet a group of sort of 5 or 6 of your friends would sit around sort of avariciously grabbing at the joystick with every available opportunity.
Absolutely. It's a different type of social experience. But I think board games are nice because you do spend time together, but you're actually all participating in that activity. So that's a bonus for sure. And I think a lot of us who did play a lot of video games as kids are really appreciating that social interaction that we get with board games now.
For sure, absolutely. I mean, I never really got into online gaming myself because I just enjoyed the sitting on the sofa with my friends aspect of it much more, you know.
Oh yeah, I've done both. But I've always played games. If I was playing an online game, it was with somebody who is also staying in the same room. So I completely agree with that.
So you've been a professional in the game industry for quite a while now. Sort of what changes have you seen over the last 5 years?
Well, I think that we're sort of seeing this interesting shift from when I started, it was mostly TCGs were the big thing. So we had Warhammer and RPGs and TCGs, lots of Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! But it was sort of the end of this really big expanse of TCGs. And when I started my store in 2000, 6, they were all sort of dying, all the little ones. And you were seeing this shift towards just the big companies. And it was also right at the time when Settlers of Catan and Apples to Apples and these other board games were becoming more prominent in society, and people actually would know what you were talking about if you said those words a little bit more likely. So we started our store right when board games were really in their infant stage in the US, but TCGs were kind of at the height of the big companies doing them. And now we're definitely seeing, with the shift of board games becoming more prominent, I think some of the deck building games like DC deck building game and Dominion and all those helped that shift happen, because a lot of people who are used to cards were more comfortable playing a card-based board game. So then a lot of people went from TCGs onto board games and really enjoying that social experience. And I think it's also important to have non-competitive games available to people. So we still have games where you can be super competitive if you want to be, but you don't have to be, like you really did with TCGs. But when you look back at all these people who are playing all of these games, I think most of us started playing RPGs when we were little kids and then played TCGs and now board games. So I'm curious to see if the industry starts shifting a little bit more towards the storytelling aspect. And I do think we're kind of seeing that because we have all of these campaign-driven board games now.
Right.
Like Descent's super popular, and we have a lot of things that are similar to Descent. And we've got essentially Star Wars Descent and other games in that category. And even Pandemic Legacy, when you think about it, is just a story that you're telling together. And that's why it's fun. And so I'm super curious to see if that pattern continues and if RPGs in the more traditional sense are able to sort of bring more of the board game crowd over to that side, because it's so creative and there's so much more that you can do with it. So I would love to see that happen in a better way. But I think the RPGs that we're looking at right now are still too difficult. There's still too much work that you have to put into them to make them really accessible to a wide crowd. But I think that we're getting close to bridging that gap.
And I think there's a large bridge to get over when it comes to speaking in a different voice and playing a different character. And people are very uncomfortable with that. You know, you get a lot of people that are very introverted in board games that the thought of speaking in a funny voice in a room full of other people would be anathema, you know?
Yeah, which I think is why you see things like Descent and Pandemic Legacy really popular, because you can do that in your own head if you want to. You can do it out loud if you want to, but it doesn't require it in the game. So it gives you a lot more choice. Yeah,
and I've never played a game that seemed more like the first series of a box set than Pandemic Legacy. It really evoked that sort of sequential TV show feel, you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just started watching Lost again, and it does give you that same sense of suspense. Like you want to watch the next episode, and I definitely felt that way with Pandemic Legacy too. You want to keep playing it. You want to go to the next box set and see where that story leads. And I think that that's not impossible to do, but it's certainly a lot of work to do that in a board game. And I hope that more companies now are able to do that they have more manpower, that there's more money behind it. And with the success of Pandemic Legacy, hopefully we'll see it.
Yeah, I mean, what I preferred about Pandemic Legacy to other games that have tried it is that, you know, if you compare it to Time Stories or something like this, Pandemic Legacy was a genuine game in which the effects were driven by the game as opposed to being more like a choose your own adventure thing, which, you know, runs up against, you come to a dead end and then you just have to run up against the dead end till it's no longer a dead end, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's very difficult to do well, and I hope that we see more of that in the future. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, so coming on to Renegade then. So everybody is talking about Renegade. You just came out of Gen Con and a lot of Renegade games were being spoken about. Just tell us about the state of the company at the moment, what you're up to.
Well, I think that we are all really focused on trying to finish up all of our 2017 projects and get those out the door. But then also we have a ton of 2018 projects in the works right now. Some really exciting stuff that we haven't talked about at all because we had so much stuff going on for the end of this year. There's stuff that we haven't told anybody about yet that we're doing for next year, which is pretty cool. But so right now we're really focusing on getting ready for Essen, We're also doing Shucks this year, which is the brand new convention by Shut Up and Sit Down. So that'll be exciting. And we're going to a retailer event, getting ready for Essen, showing off our new stuff there. So we're just sort of in super convention mode right now, but also on sort of a larger scale, we're also growing. We're looking for a few more people to fill in some potential spots just to help our team out a little bit. We've all been working way over time for about a year now just to get everything to where we want it to be. We have really high standards for all of our stuff. So I think it's great. I really enjoy working for a small company because it's just a few of us right now, but having a little bit more manpower behind all of the really aggressive goals that we have, I think will be really helpful. Maybe I'll get a sleep. I don't know.
Sleep's overrated.
That's what I hear.
So, you're going to be at Essen this year. Now, I went to my first Essen probably about 5-6 years ago now, and there were almost no American companies there. So FFG weren't there, those sort of big American companies. And I see more and more American companies having a presence at Essen now. Is that now a necessity to be at Essen if you're an American company?
I think it's interesting. So we're seeing the same thing over here too. And I think that's just because as a general economy, we're becoming more globalized and the internet is making things a lot easier for our fans to tell us, please come to Essen. We want to see you in Europe. Come over across the pond. And it's hard for us to say no to that. And I think that European companies are seeing the same thing. Pegasus had a little booth at Gen Con right next to us this year. So yeah. I think that we will be there mostly because our fans are demanding it, not because we don't have good partners in Europe, which we certainly do. But if we can be there and support those partners who are doing localization deals for us and getting our games to a wider audience, then that'll help everybody out. So that's part of why we're going. And also just because it's fun. I like going to Essen. We want to see all the new games and just be part of such a big event. It's such a big deal, just like Gen Con is, to be over there and see what's going on in the industry. I think it's hard to do a good job if you're just focused on your own stuff in your own echo chamber. You need to see what everybody else is doing.
So at Gen Con, you did a very interesting marketing strategy with Clank in Space. You didn't release the game until, you didn't tell anyone the game was coming out until 2 days before Gen Con or something. How did that work out for you, that strategy? And why did you choose that strategy for this game?
Well, I think that there was enough excitement about Clank that doing a surprise announcement like that made more sense than it would have for another game. Despite the amount of excitement about Ex Libris, if we had done the exact same thing with that game, no one would have known what we were talking about. When we say, surprise, we have Ex Libris, everyone would have said, well, we don't care yet. We don't know if it's cool yet. So we're going to go do something else. But with Clank in Space, there was enough understanding of what that meant to people that it was exciting and fun to have that be a big surprise. And the crowds of people swarming our booth definitely showed that it was exciting. I don't know if it would have been just as exciting if we'd announced it 3 weeks ahead of time, but I'd be surprised. When you look at other companies that are not in our industry, like think about Apple. Next week, they're going to announce their new set of iPhones, and it's still not very well known what those special features are going to be or what they're going to announce at that event. But as soon as they announce it, you're going to be able to buy that product. And right now, if you think about Kickstarters go up and immediately you can take an action. You can pre-order that game. But in our way of doing things, if we're not kickstarting a project, if I tell you, hey, Clank in Space is coming, if you're one of the lucky few people to be at Gen Con, you can get it. But otherwise, too bad, you have to wait a few months. Then that's a long time for people. And if I tell people 3 months ahead of Gen Con, this thing's coming, oh wait, and then you have to wait another 2 months. That's a really, really long time. So we're trying to shorten that time frame between when you hear about something and when you can actually do something about it, which is hard to do because usually we have distribution partners and magazines we need to be in and all these other marketing things that require certain time frames. But with Clank in Space, we said, Well, we know everyone's going to be excited. We're just going to throw all that to the wind, and we're just going to do it on a super short time frame, and it'll be a little extra work for a few people, but it'll be fun.
Yeah. I mean, I've started backing Kickstarter projects again after a brief hiatus. And the one thing I really notice is the sort of long lead times on these things, you know. So I'm backing projects that I won't see for a year. And I have that initial, you know, buzz of excitement, and then I just completely forget it until it comes through the post, you know. And I guess with the way board games are produced, if you announce them as you send the files off to production, that's a long time before people are going to be able to buy it, I guess.
Exactly. And that's one thing we're running up against, is that as people's attention spans get shorter and shorter, that regular lead time that we were used to is not working anymore. So I don't have a good solution to that, but it's a challenge that I think a lot of companies are facing who don't regularly use Kickstarter.
So what do Renegade have for the future?
Well, we did announce at Gen Con that we're doing Overlight, which is our first RPG, but it's actually going to be more than just that. We're doing an entire world that's in this very, very cool setting. And the first product in that world is going to be the RPG, which makes a lot of sense, because if we really want to make this an immersive experience, then we start off by creating that world and telling people really what it is, which is just setting up an RPG. So then after that, once everybody has experienced that part of it, then they can go on to enjoy other products that we'll have in that line that we haven't announced yet. So that was a pretty big deal for us. I'm pretty excited for that whole project, and I think it's going to be something different, which will be fun, and having our own world that we can go play in will be really nice for the future. Beyond that, we have a ton of really neat projects that are just about to hit the shelves, including Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Card Game, which I think I'm really happy about, because we've done a lot of licensed projects between Scott and I in our careers at various other companies. And this one, I'm really happy that it services the fans so well. If you like Scott Pilgrim, you're going to really feel like this game is made for you. And that's one thing I want to do with every licensed product we ever do. So I'm happy about that. But then also Ex Libris is coming out at the end of October. We've also got Flip Ships and Sentient, which are coming out next week. Atlas Enchanted Lands, which is by the same designer as Sentient and World's Fair, J. Alex Cavern. That one's coming out at the end of this month. We also have, this one I'm super excited about, Kepler 3042. We haven't talked a lot about it yet, but it actually was an Essen release last year under Placentia Games. And they allowed us to take this awesome 3X game and do a complete re-art theme of it. So the theme is still the same, but the art's totally new, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. So
which X is missing?
Geez. So there's Explore, Expand, the Exterminate is missing. What's the other one?
The Exploit is the third one.
Yes. You're right. Yeah. So we're not going to be exterminating each other in this one.
That's good. I think we need some peace in our current times. So.
That's right. So we just took that part out. No, it's a very cool game. So if you didn't get a chance to play it at Essen last year, you will get to do that this year with all brand new artwork. And
for 2018, anything exciting, or are you not allowed to say?
We do have an announcement we'll be making around Essen. I don't know exactly when quite yet, but that one will be for a pretty big game that we have coming out early in 2018. But we haven't quite announced it yet. But it's won awards. It's a pretty good one. So I love the artwork that we're doing for that. I have Slack is something that we use in our company all the time. And every morning I wake up just hoping that I'm going to see new artwork in the Slack channel for this upcoming game. It's going to be awesome. I think you guys will really like it.
Fabulous. So just one final question. If Renegade was said to have an ethos, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's that we just make good games. We don't have a particular type of game that we're always going to make. There's nothing that you can always say we will expect this from Renegade every time, except that we are just going to make good games. And they could be from any category. They could be any type of game. We could do them in any fashion. Just there's no way to plan or expect what we're going to be doing in a year from now, except that we will be making good games. And that's at least our company sort of philosophy going forward all the time, is that that's always what we want to be doing.
Fabulous. Well, Sarah Erikson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.